Okay, we are back with part 2 of our video about Italian or Baroque opera. Again, this begins with Monteverdi, and at the end of his life, he writes another opera. Actually, he's written a number of them in the meantime, but an opera called The Coronation of Poppaea, that is here. And that's the one we're going to listen to, or have you listen to. Basically, a couple of ideas about the opera then in Monteverdi's hands. He is going to reduce the amount of accompaniment, the general polyphony. These are like a number of different voices going at the same time in the accompaniment, which made the text very hard to understand. And Monteverdi's idea was to force the words and the emotions of the music to the front, so that that was the dominant aspect of the music, and that the accompaniment itself became a background, so that everybody could understand what was going on. And we have then the idea of drama, poetry, costumes, and music and scenery, all part of these productions. And that is opera. The music is going continually. It's not, I mean, there is a certain start and stop, but it's all of a piece. And these operas lasted anywhere between 1 and 2 hours. So these were long-term events, and they would be accompanied with, obviously, a break in the action, and maybe there would be some poets that would come out and entertain in between, or some musicians, or jugglers, or whatever, and then they would go back and continue with the opera. So in Monteverdi's hands, then, the opera sounds like a modern song with a prominent single melody and a chordal accompaniment, and that's adding the color in the background. But always the words and the emotion of the words is first and foremost. The emotions were a very important part of what Monteverdi was trying to achieve, and he does that through dissonance. This is the word we talked about early on, where you have kind of the clash of notes that are demanding some kind of a tonal resolution. So you're going to hear music that sometimes sounds very grating, and then it's going to come to a resolution of cadences. And that tension release is something that's really driving the emotional content of the music and, of course, the actors on the stage. One famous biographer talked about Monteverdi being the first to create opera out of characters who live, breathe, love, and hate. So you get a real sense of what is driving these characters, what their emotions are, and what they're all about. And nowhere is that more evident than in the wonderful opera called The Coronation of Poppaea. In this opera, we have a libretto, which is a little book which has all of the words. It was now we might call this a screenplay for a movie. So the librettist, the person who wrote this music, was a fellow by the name of Busanello. You don't need to know that, but we have somebody dedicated to writing the script, basically, that this opera would be based on. And he takes actual events that were taking place in Rome during 58 to 65 AD, and he compresses them into a single day's action so that they could be portrayed on the stage. So certain liberties are taken in the story, as they would be in a movie today, for example, in order that it can be projected within a 120-minute flick. The overriding kind of characteristics or emotions of the opera has been called, in the case of Nero and what happens in this opera, at best ambiguous and at worst perverted, and an extraordinary glorification of lust and ambition. So this is a story about power, about love and lust, and the actions that come about as a result of being driven by these emotions, these characteristics. So, a little bit of background, who you need to know. Nero is at the center of everything. The emperor, famous Nero. He's called in Italian Nerone, so if you hear that name, that is Nero. Nero is married to Ottavia, that is his wife, but he has taken on a lover, and her name is Poppaea. And as the opera begins, Ottone, who is also the lover of Poppaea, who does not know anything about Nero, Ottone comes back from a battle. He comes back to his palace, and he notices that there are guards stationed outside his palace, where Poppaea is supposed to be. And he realizes that the fact that there are these soldiers outside means that somebody is inside being watched, and that is Nero. And he realizes that his lover has taken a lover of her own. We're going to listen, or I'm going to actually have you listen to a series of arias that take place during the course of this opera. I noticed that on my video that for me to play them here, the sound isn't good because the microphone is picking up the sound that's projected from the microphones. So on this page of my screen share, I have the links that I want you to listen to on your own. There are basically two facets of opera that you need to know about in terms of how things are composed. And I'm going to put them real quickly right here on this page. It's the idea of recitative, which is the spoken, sung dialogue. And that is sections that are accompanied by the instruments, but you have a sense that they are spoken. They don't go into a regular beat pattern. It takes on the basic rhythm of our normal speech, like I'm speaking to you now. And this was probably pretty typical of what these Florentine camerata characters thought how Greek opera was performed. We don't know that for sure. But it was not sung in any kind of general beat or pulse. So you'll have a recitative, which basically lays out the information. It's a means of getting through the important facts, sets the stage, as it were, for what comes next, the aria. And that is the sung, well, let's call that's the song with a regular pulse or beat. So we have two concepts in opera. And that is the idea of recitative, spoken sung part of it, and the aria. And the aria is a reflection on the action. In other words, the singer is thinking how I love her, or singing to the person you love about my love for you. It's a moment of where everything seems to freeze, and you can kind of imagine, like, if there are other actors or players on the stage, they would freeze while these two express their emotions for one another, or somebody's thinking back on something that happened to them earlier. So there is no forward action in an aria, but it is a moment of repose and for the emotions to be expressed. And at this point in the aria, the beat becomes stable, so you're going to hear a bum, 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 bum pattern or something of that nature. And over that, you're going to have a song, and that is called an aria. And the idea of the back and forth interplay between recitative and aria will continue in the field of opera for the next several hundred years. We'll talk more about that over time, and it will become increasingly clear to differentiate the idea between aria and recitative. It's not always so clear in Monteverdi because it's a new and developing idea. But that is basically what the opera is comprised of. So the opera opens with an introduction of the gods, talking about what mankind is capable of, and whether it's lust or whether it's fortune or these kinds of things. And then it drops into 3 acts. And in these 3 acts, we have our characters. And it opens with Ottone coming onto the scene, understanding that his wife is being seduced by Nero, the emperor. So for all intents and purposes, he has lost her to Nero. So Ottone decides he's going to take on another lover of his own, and her name is Drusilla. But I want you to listen to the following aria between Nero and Poppaea. And I've chosen for these a number of different performances of the Coronation of Poppaea that are available on YouTube. Some of them are traditional. Some of them are more cutting edge. Sometimes performances try to put things into modern dress and make it relevant to our modern day. Sometimes they adhere to tradition, and you have customary dress of how perhaps it would have looked in Monteverdi's day. So I have a kind of a smattering of all of them. And I believe in the first one, it's actually two females singing the roles. Sometimes there is a tradition in opera of what's called the trouser role, so that men perform the role of women in women's clothing and vice versa. Sometimes this is actually a part of the opera, and in this case, it's going to be part of the plot when somebody needs to be disguised. But there's also a tradition in opera of men singing women's roles, for example, and women singing men's roles. And it has to do with largely the sound of the human voice and what can best portray the emotions of the character. So I believe in this case, they are both women, but one is clearly Nero and one is Poppaea, and you get a great sense in this aria, Signor de non partire, Signor, don't leave me, of Poppaea pleading with Nero not to leave the castle where they have been lovemaking. Okay. Oops, sorry. Where'd I go here? Coming back. Sorry, just a moment. Didn't mean to delete that screen. Okay. So we can see also that the Coronation of Poppaea is constructed in 3 separate acts. And the upshot of the first act is to introduce the characters and the basic issues of the plot. So going back for a moment to our characters. So Nero is in love with Poppaea, but he has a wife. That's the first problem. And Nero's advisor is a fellow by the name of Seneca. And Seneca receives word from the gods of what Nero's plan is, that he wants to out Ottavia and keep Poppaea for his own. And Seneca advises him against doing that. He says the people won't like it, the gods are against it, but Nero is so, his love for Poppaea is so strong and overriding that all reason has been thrown to the wind. And any of you who have experienced intense passion and love before know that your good sense often is overridden by what your heart is telling you. And this is what happens to Nero. He wants to replace Ottavia with Poppaea. Seneca says, not advisable. And he gets very fed up with Seneca's kind of nagging. And at one point, Poppaea steps in and says, you need to get him out of the picture. So because of Poppaea's urging, Nero instructs Seneca to kill himself. It's a very kind of a Greek idea. And the next aria that you're going to listen to comes in Act 2, and generally in Act 2 is where the height of the intensity of an opera will be. It would be, for instance, the halfway through the movie you would be watching, where everything kind of comes into a collision. And the aria you're going to watch here is Seneca preparing for his death. Then, returning to the opera plot, Ottavia basically kind of steps in and wants Poppaea killed. Ottavia and Ottone begin to work together, and she tells Ottone that in order to assassinate Poppaea, he's going to need to disguise himself, and she suggests that he does this in the clothing of Drusilla. Drusilla was, as you can remember, the lover that Ottone takes, all the while his feelings for Poppaea have never really gone away. So he's, in a certain sense, trying to get even, but his true love is still for his old girlfriend. But he listens to Ottavia, he dresses as Drusilla, and plans to murder and plans to murder Poppaea. However, we're going to go here now to a printed plot that I think will make it easier for you to understand. Anarta is the nurse, or the lady in waiting, in other words, of Ottavia, the outed wife of Nero. And she basically arrives on the scene and proclaims to Nero what is going on with this attempted murder of Ottone, attempted murder of Poppaea. Nero doesn't believe her at first, but she swears that, in fact, in order to protect Ottone, she says that she will be the one to die. And Nero understands finally who's telling the truth, who's not telling the truth. And in a moment of clemency, he decides to spare Ottone's life and banishes him from Rome. And Drusilla, who loves him, decides to go with him. Ottavia still needs to be dealt with, and Nero decides to banish her as well, and does so under the pretext that she was attempting murder. Never mind the fact that they told Seneca to kill himself. Ottavia had plans and had brought others into her complicity to murder within the palace. And so Nero sentences her to be banished as well. And in one of the most moving arias in the third act of the coronation is the point where Ottavia bids farewell to Rome, and her famous aria, Addio Roma. This is yet another performance that I want you to watch. And even though you can't always understand the lyrics, and I think in this case the subtitles are actually in French, you will understand the gist of her emotions. She's being forced to leave Rome. She's been forced to leave the people she loves. She's been forced to leave her family and everything behind to go to some land where nobody will know her, and she's taken completely out of her element. It's a heartbreaking aria of somebody who's now going to lose everything that they had. And remember, this was a woman who was married to the emperor of Rome, of one of the most powerful cities in the world. So she is being banished for her actions, but largely because of the fact that Nero has taken on a lover. Okay, so that is a major aria in the third act of this opera, Coronation of Poppaea. And then the opera ends back at the palace. That now that the major players are out of the picture, Ottavia has been banished. Ottone and the coup plotters have been banished. There's nothing anymore stopping Nero and Poppaea from becoming a thing. And Nero has her crowned emperor, or empress, I should say. And at the end of the opera, they sing a rapturous love duet, Pur ti miro, or I gaze at you, I possess you, at the point where she has been crowned empress, and they realize that at this point they can live together as emperor and empress. This is another aria, the last one that I want you to listen to here at the end of this link. And I think this one is done in a more traditional setting. Again, you have to remember that, first of all, this is this is drama. It's acted out. You might find it exaggerated at times. You might not like the style of singing. In some cases, like this first one up here, I've tried to pick singers, never mind kind of the action or how it appears on the stage, but singers whose voices I think are the most striking to listen to. This last one, if I believe I put the right one in the order, is a more traditional setting of the opera. So the voices aren't necessarily as pure, but you get a greater sense of kind of the whole essence of the drama, the costumes, the scenery, and all of that. So ultimately, the things to remember. In opera, which is now a Baroque manifestation, it is one of the major musical forms to come out of the Baroque period. You will need to remember that. Baroque opera It's comprised of several acts. We have singers and accompanists, or an accompanying body. In the case of the coronation, we have a full orchestra, and I think some of these you might actually be able to see some of the instruments accompanying the singers. Monteverdi, in the first performance of this, would have been the conductor himself. So the orchestra would have been beneath the stage, and the singers up on top, much as it's done today. And each of these acts then contains a series of recitatives and arias. So remember, the recitative being the spoken sung dialogue where the action basically takes place. Let's say here, site of the action, okay? Or the action basically would be, yes, the action is moved forward. And then the reflective part, which becomes more of like a song, where we have a reflection on what that action is. And again, some of this will be obvious in what you're listening to, and sometimes not. But when you hear kind of sung, spoken dialogue, it's kind of a little bit of both, with a lot of words. That will be the recitative. And these are each arias. Now, some of them contain also recitative. So this is a rather long scene that you're going to watch. The Seneca prepares for death. But when you hear these words, for example, at the end, Pur ti miro, that is the aria that when Nero and Poppaea are in full possession of one another. Okay, I hope you enjoy your introduction to opera. It's a powerful art form. It's an unusual art form, and one that probably will take some getting used to. And if anybody's interested in watching the entire opera, you let me know and I can set you up with some good links for that. All right, I hope you enjoy, and I will see you all next Wednesday.